Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with episode 2476 of the Cabral Concept, where we will be going over the entire history of low-carb diets and basically why they started, what they're mainly used for, how long should you be on a low-carb diet, and finally, what does the science actually say now that we're in modern day? So I found the article very fascinating, and so I wanted to share it with you. Anything that I find interesting, I'm hoping that at least a couple other people do. And I always love to give credit where credit's due. It's such an amazing industry. I don't think that we need to try to claim credit for everything that we talk about. And I certainly don't want that to be the case for myself either. So what I'm going to do is link everything up today at stephencabral.com/2476. And as I do, I'm actually going to give you the infographic where I found this, excuse me, and it's called Dietetically Speaking is the name of the website. And it's / the history of low carb. So I'll link that up for you. Again, I don't even know who it was written by, but it was written by this website. And so what I did was I actually looked into any of the ones that I was unfamiliar with to make sure that this is actually a true story. And it is, lo and behold, right? So the only issue is essentially how it's shared with you as if all of it's true. And so what I love to do is always be able to give you both sides of the equation. I really try to stay unbiased with all of this. We use low carb in our practice, but we don't have everybody on a low carb diet. And even those people we do have on a low carb diet, we don't do super low carb for more than really 3 weeks. And we'll share with you essentially why. And I've done that on previous shows too. So let's just dive right into it. And then I'll be able to kind of give you all the different nuances as we move along. All right. So it says the first low carb diet that we know about that started was way back with Greek Olympic athletes in 776 BC. So, I mean, that's quite a bit of time ago, right? And so they consumed heavy meat diets and lower carb. And so they basically gave their preference to eating more and more meat because, as any bodybuilder will tell you, and now I know that you can be a bodybuilder as a vegan, but I don't know any of the top level, like Mr. Olympia athletes that are vegan just in general. So it's easier, I'm not gonna say it's the only way, it's just easier to put on more muscle mass, gain more strength. And I know there's a competitive powerlifter out there that's vegan, so I get it, I understand, but they're also potentially on testosterone, you know, they're on steroids, so there is that. I mean, we have to take that into consideration. But meat is the most anabolic food in the world. I mean, that's the truth. Meat, and you could say dairy as well. So putting that out there, that's why the Olympic athletes did it. And since they gave preference to those foods, that's what they filled up on. And I think that that's fair. And so there we have it. That was the very first start. And it's certainly carried over to this day with bodybuilders and many other athletes, a higher meat diet. But they're not necessarily low carb. They're low carb as they start to diet down. And I'll share that with you as well, because I've worked with many, many athletes, Olympians as well, and people cutting weight too. Okay, so then we had to wait almost 2,000 years for an update. And this is more than that, right? In 1863. So now we're dating back to, I would say, the start. So in the 1800s is essentially the start of the, I don't want to call it natural health, but let's call it overall thinking about the health and wellness of the body. People are starting to settle in a little bit more. They're, building towns and communities and government and all those things. And they're looking now more at their overall health and body. And so this is really the start to it. And this was the Banting-Harvey plan. And so William Banting, it says, promoted a low-carb diet for weight loss and health in his letter on corpulence to the public. So basically, it was saying that people are starting to gain too much weight now that there's more food that's easily accessible. Certainly wasn't easy back then without refrigeration and everything, but more accessible, more agriculture, more people, they are working a little less physically, certainly still physical jobs, and eating more, sitting more. So that was the start to it. Interesting, right? About 20 years later, the low-carb, high-fat diets emerge in Germany. I will say that Germany was always one of the first movers in terms of bioregulatory medicine and health. And certainly that was going on in the mid to late 1800s. When I studied bioregulatory medicine, that's a lot of what I'm talking about. All right. Then about 40 years after that, the ketogenic diet was first used. So a lot of people now, 100 years later, think that the keto diet is something new. It's not. It's been around a long, long time. But it was actually being used medically, which in my opinion is how it should be used. Use it for medical-based conditions. Most people, though, they're doing a keto diet, they're not really in ketosis. And that's because their protein levels are way too high. But I'll save that for another day. I've already done many, many podcasts on it. But they're just, and we're happy to link some of those up. So why don't I link some up at stephencabral.com/2476. But it was used for epilepsy. So ketogenic diet was first used with epilepsy. To this day, it's used for things like brain tumors, et cetera. Some people use it with type 2 diabetes. It can be quite dangerous with type 1. You just have to be careful. But it's not my go-to by any way, shape, or form. But it certainly has its medical-based uses. Okay. 1927, the Inuit, depending on how you like to pronounce it, was explored. So basically, there's a culture that lives predominantly on fish, fermented fish, and a lot of high-protein, high-fat foods. And they have lower risk of heart disease. Dr. Weston Price explored this as well. Now, the interesting thing, though, is because I'm like, okay, yeah, this is really interesting. Let me study this. Oh, they were eating super high level omega-3s. Well, that makes sense, right? Because omega-3s are protective for the cardiovascular system. That makes sense. But they were so swayed towards just protein, and the typical Inuit does not live more than their mid-60s to later 60s, somewhere around 67 years old. So again, like a lot of people try to point to these carnivore or low carb or whatever is like the go-to. I get it, I understand, but I have yet to see the indigenous people that have lived to 100 plus on a carnivore diet. I just haven't seen it. If someone's welcome to share that with me, but you can't point to the Maasai or any of these people that you say, because their life expectancy is typically mid to late 60s. And so, that's even lower than the United States. So again, I don't know that you could say, well, they don't have as much medical care. I totally get it. But at the same time, shouldn't that diet, if that's like the perfect diet, protect them? I'm asking the questions. And that's because, again, I have no dog in the race. I'm here to help people live the longest and healthiest life humanly possible. All right. So then in 1935, this is a weird one. They mentioned the alkaline diet a few times. So the alkaline diet emerges, and it says that they try to remove acidic-based foods. I've studied the alkaline diet inside and out. You don't have to go all in on it, but there's some good nuances to it that you can start to pick up. I understand that the blood is going to maintain a pH of around 7.356. Like, I get it. I understand. So before the comments start coming in, I understand how the body maintains alkalinity. But acids, so eating a lot of acidic-based food does use up the minerals and kidney stress in order to actually balance the blood to a normal alkalinity. You don't get anything for free, right? Your body has to go through chemical processes in order to balance the blood sugar levels out. Anyway, I digress. I just think it's strange. The alkaline diet really shouldn't be in there because it's not necessarily low carb by like any way, shape, or form, like imaginable. All right, the cabbage soup diet. This is an interesting one because it was actually started in the 1950s. I didn't know it started in the 1950s. That's new to me. So, but I know the second phase. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But basically, you don't eat anything but cabbage soup for 7 days. I don't know what the brain trust is behind that one. It's detoxifying, high in sulfur, all these things. But basically, you're on not just a low carb diet, you're on a low calorie diet. It's very, very low in calories. All right. So again, when you look for weight loss, which is basically what it's for, or a liquid based fast, that's it right there. All right. 1958. Eat Fat and Grow Slim. That's the name of the book. It was published that promoted a low carb, high fat diet. 64 was the Drinking Man's Diet. This one was a good chuckle for me. I love seeing this because basically most diets just turn into marketing. They're like, if you look at the carnivore diet today, it's just a marketing scheme for the most part. The people who were into the carnivore diet know that it's unmaintainable for most people and not necessarily healthy in the long run either. So they're now saying, you can eat fruit on it, but just these fruit. You can have honey, but just this honey. Okay, no, you can have maple syrup too. Oh, wait, and you can have dairy. And so it's like, it's absurd, right? It's no longer a carnivore diet. Like you're just eating now some certain fruits and vegetables and honey and all sorts of different things. Like, okay, so it's an omnivore diet, right? Like that's really what we're talking about. But anyway, it's good for marketing if you're into that. So that's that. The Drinking Man's Diet. So you just limit your carbs to 60 grams a day, but you could just eat high protein foods and drink alcohol. So there you have it, right? there you have it. All right. In 1967, we start moving into now the true that we know today, low carb diets. Okay, so we've got the Stillman weight loss diet, which is low carb, high protein, 6 meals a day. So very small meals, 6 times a day. That's kind of what started the eating frequently. Then we've got the Dr. Atkins diet revolution, the first one, which was basically no carbs. Like it was less than 5 grams of net carbs a day. So it was basically no carbs. I mean, like literally nothing. You were just eating meat and bacon and butter and eggs and just like devoid of all carbs. It changed a little bit. I'll share that with you in a moment. Then we've got the Stone Age diet. I don't know if you've heard about that one, but it's, I would say more of the start of the paleo primal based diet. You're taking out grains, you're taking out dairy, although dairy is allowed in some of those, or anything with added sugar. And it's not too wild, right? Like, okay, like pretty much I eat very few grains in my diet. I eat a little bit of ancient grains. I don't consume dairy. That's for some people if they decide to. And I don't really go with added sugars, just normal fruit and my vegetables and my, sweet potatoes, Japanese yams, etc. So that was a pretty normal one, not necessarily low carb. So I just want to share that with you. That's not a low carb diet. So I wanted to call that out as part of this timeline. The Scarsdale diet was a new one for me. I hadn't heard of the Scarsdale diet. 1978. Great year. Emerges, which is moderately low carbs, around 34%, but it had very low calories. So about a third of the macros were from carbs, but 850 to 1,000 calories total per day. So again, what's it going to do? Well, it's going to help you lose weight. All right, the 1980s, we're back with the cabbage soup diet. Well, there you have it. Apparently it was so popular 30 years ago, we're going to bring it back. And it was renamed the TWA Stewardess Diet is what it was called, the Dolly Parton Diet, and the Models Diet. Basically just eat soup for a week. Interesting. Okay. In 85, we've got the first Paleolithic nutrition paper published officially. And that's essentially supporting that Stone Age diet, which was from 1975, so 10 years later. Then we've got Dr. Atkins in 1992, the second revolution, right? So this is when I started now to hear about Dr. Atkins, because in 92 was I in high school? I guess I was going into high school. So I would not have heard of Dr. Atkins back then because I wasn't even in high school yet. So I was getting into high school. So allows slightly more carbs. Now you can actually eat some vegetables. So they're like, all right, we can't just give people, I know some people believe this, but we can't just give people butter and bacon and steak. So we need to add a little bit more of these veggies in there. So that's what they did. All right, then we've got the zone diet, 95. This one I quickly became familiar with. I actually use this quite a bit from late 90s on when I'm working with clients. And it was essentially 40% carbs, and then you have 30 fat, and you've got 30 protein. Fairly well balanced, works for a lot of people, but wanted to just share that with you. You can manipulate it however you want, but a lot of people got a lot of results from that, and they like that. All right, then we had Lauren Cordain's The Paleo Diet in 2002. Kind of paleo diet's already been around. But now we've got the revolution coming for the paleo style diets. Salt Beach Diet was next. Salt Beach Diet was not a bad setup. It basically went from low carb to moderate. Then you could increase if needed. The problem was with the Salt Beach Diet, it just wasn't the greatest selection of foods. But it was focused on low GI, focused on low glycemic foods, so glycemic index and glycemic load. It wasn't that wild. It really wasn't. Not my favorite choices of foods, but not bad. I certainly used the mentality of it when I was creating my Fatlocity system, which I used for body transformation. What else do we have? We've got the now quit sugar diet. So now people are talking about quitting sugar. This is now just 7 years ago, 2014. People have been talking about that for a while, but basically getting rid of sugar in the diet was the phase over the next few years. And then we've got now the keto diet in 2017 start to gain in popularity. Certainly, I'm saying it's peaking, really now or a year ago. And then we've got things, so the keto-based diet, we talked about that. And then we've got things like the dopamine diet. I don't know why that was added there. So again, I think that this, I think this is whoever started Dietetically Speaking, this is a really nice infographic, but the dopamine diet is not a low-carb diet. And that's because, if you're on the dopamine diet, you're looking to increase foods high in tyrosine, which is so phenylalanine, tyrosine to dopamine. They're precursors to dopamine, which is, if you've never heard my podcast on dopamine, I will share that with you at stephencabral.com/2476. And you can always search it at stephencabral.com/podcast. But the dopamine diet, yes, it's very rich in omega-3s and lean proteins and nuts and seeds, but it also includes blueberries and strawberries and bananas and apples and prunes and even some dark chocolate, all right? So I would say that that's not necessarily low carb. You can make it low carb, but it's not necessarily low carb. And then essentially that moves us towards the present. In the present day, what do I see now in terms of low carb? Well, I see the carnivore diet, and this dietetics was completed before the carnivore. This is the latest iteration of low carb. So just understand that all of these things are trends. And so I want to pull it together like this, is that there's nothing wrong with a low carb diet. It should just not consume your entire life, meaning I can't go through all of this and make it another podcast, so I'm going to link up previous podcasts to this, but just keep in mind that, and I just did a case study yesterday, on a lot of people on low carb diets, is that it can be very stressful to the body, especially if you're more of an ectomorph body type. It can be stressful if you have low thyroid-based issues. It can really sink your thyroid and metabolism to a greater degree. There can be issues with the gut microbiome. If you're not getting in enough carbohydrates and roughage, you'll shrink your gut microbiome, which, by the way, helps some people. It's a palliative, conventional medicine type fix. Is you just remove the thing that's hurting you. Okay, well, that's fine, but you never figured out why carbohydrates were causing issues in the first place. And it's got imbalances in terms of bacteria, and it could be candida overgrowth, etc. So I'm always recommending get to the root cause. If you have gut issues, run the gut bundle. You can find that at stephencabral.com/shop. You don't have to run it with us, of course. You can run it with NIHP L2, NIHP2 level 2, or you can run it with your local naturopathic doctor. Just again, there's always an answer why. But essentially it's this. Okay, so we use a 3-week lower carbohydrate diet for people that need it on something like the Fatlocity system or the Functional Medicine Detox. Again, you can find these at stephencabral.com/shop. If you want to learn more about them, you're welcome to. You don't have to, but I want you to know exactly what we do that works. But then after that, we are very quickly finding out how many carbohydrates a person can eat, right? The goal is to actually eat food. Contrary to popular belief, the goal is not to fast 22 hours a day and eat as little as possible. That's really not the goal. Because if you're in your 20s, you've got a lot of reserves and life is good and you'll probably have energy. You try doing that in your 40s and 50s, and most people are going to crash after a couple months. And so there's also not a need to do it. So what we want to do is we want to get you the results now with short-term things that do work, and then also look towards the future. So short-term to long-term plan. A lot of people doing the short-term plan, right? But they don't have the idea for the long-term plan. And that's okay. Like, that's not necessarily your job, like, unless this is what you do every day. But you want to be careful following the fads. And so that's why I wanted to share this with you, because we're going to look back in another 10, 20 years and be like, oh, that's when we did this. And the first carnivore diets was just eat red meat for 3 meals a day, or eggs, just a dozen eggs, and then red meat at dinner, and then whatever at skip lunch, like whatever it might be, right? But it's like, okay, but that was like, when you only have a hammer, everything, every problem looks like a nail, right? Is that how it works? I'm pretty sure that's how the analogy works, but you know what I mean. And so you have to be careful with that. That necessarily isn't the best way to solve whatever your health-based issues are. And I just don't want you to look back and be like, oh, I kind of fell for that trend and I did this and I did that. So again, I have nothing wrong. I have no problems with even a short-term keto-based diet or a short-term low-carb diet. No problem with that. I just want you to always have that long-term plan. It's like, okay, like, what am I transitioning? Why am I doing it? And then what am I transitioning to? And so just always let us know if you have any questions. We're here to help. We really are. We are completely unbiased. Our only goal is to help any client that comes in to work with us. And then, of course, my goal is to teach other practitioners a really healthy and safe way to be able to work with clients as well. So thank you so much. Hopefully this was helpful. Have an amazing rest of the day. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Cabral concept. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.